In the misty arc of islands that would one day be called Japan, volcanic peaks rose from restless seas and forests dripped with rain. When the last ice retreated, small bands of hunter-fishers pressed obsidian into arrowheads, set shell hooks in tidal shallows, and warmed themselves beside cedar-scented fires. They left no names and carved no monuments, yet their footprints sank into ash that hardened to memory. Millennia rolled on. Clay pots patterned with twisted cords bubbled over hearth fires, heralding the world's first settled villages without fields. Pit dwellings clustered amid chestnut groves, while lacquered combs and enigmatic dog figurines hinted at a faith woven through stone, water, and wind. Far across the sea, bronze and rice were already altering destinies, but on these shores the rhythm remained wild and patient. Here, on the rim of two continents and at the edge of tomorrow, a people were learning the tempo of tides, the promise of soil, and the power of story. Their quiet experiments with land and belief would become the prologue to emperors, temples, and warriors, an ancient overture cast in wood smoke and waves. This is the story of ancient Japan, an island realm whose awakening would ripple across the seas of Asia. Around 40,000 years ago, when most of the planet lay beneath vast ice sheets, a chain of rugged islands at the eastern edge of Asia began to receive its first human visitors. Lower sea levels had narrowed, or in places erased, the strait between Korea, Sakhalin, and the Japanese archipelago. Small groups of hunter-gatherers moved along these land bridges and coastlines, following herds of giant deer and Naumann's elephants into landscapes of open grass and conifer forest. Evidence for their arrival is scattered but striking. In Okinawa's Yamashita Cave, a child's remains dated to about 32,000 BCE show that people already ranged far south of the main islands. Farther north, obsidian blades turned up at Shirataki in Hokkaido match rock deposits over 150 kilometers away, hinting at surprisingly long exchange routes. Radiocarbon dates from Fuki Cave in Kyushu reach back beyond 38,000 BCE, making these tools among the earliest securely dated artifacts in East Asia. Paleolithic technology in Japan developed a distinctive look. Hunters favoured razor-thin microblades, stone slivers set into wooden or bone handles like miniature box cutters. Such composite tools could be resharpened quickly, an advantage when stalking fast-moving game. Equally prized was natural volcanic glass. Japanese obsidian breaks with edges sharper than surgical steel. Archaeologists have found caches of obsidian points in every major island, showing that early bands knew each quarry and carried the glass for trade or future hunts. Daily life revolved around seasonal movement. In winter, the people sheltered in simple windbreaks or cave mouths, sewing hide clothing with bone needles. Come spring, they shifted to river valleys to net salmon or collect edible roots exposed by retreating snow. Charred plant remains suggest that they already roasted horse chestnuts and acorns, leaching away toxins with hot water, one of the earliest traces of deliberate food processing in the archipelago. The environment itself was in constant flux. During the last glacial maximum, about 20,000 BCE, average temperatures here sat 10 degrees lower than today. Yet even then, Japan's varied topography created pockets of milder climate where cedars and cypresses survived. These green refuges became crucial way stations for both animals and humans. When global temperatures rose abruptly after 14,000 BCE, broadleaf forests exploded across the islands, large Ice Age mammals vanished, and coastal plains widened as melting glaciers poured silt into the sea. That ecological shock set the stage for a remarkable cultural shift. People who had long followed migrating herds now found rich marine shallows and nut-laden woodlands right outside their shelters. Physical traces of the hunters themselves are rare. Japan's wet, acidic soils destroy bone, but a handful of skeletons provide glimpses of appearance and health. The Minatogawa remains from Okinawa, dated to around 18,000 BCE, show a sturdy build and healed injuries, suggesting close-knit groups that cared for wounded members. DNA recovered from a few teeth indicates that these Paleolithic pioneers carried genetic lineages unlike any found on the mainland today. Yet some fragments persist in modern Japanese populations, revealing threads of continuity across tens of millennia. Perhaps the most evocative find is a polished pendant of deer bone from the Tanegashima site. Less than 2 centimeters long and drilled for suspension, it is Japan's oldest known personal ornament. Its maker invested skill in a purely symbolic object, a sign that even in this earliest chapter, ideas of identity and beauty were taking shape alongside the hunt. By the time the Ice Age drew to a close, the descendants of these first settlers were poised for radical change. Warmer seas teemed with fish, forests offered steady harvests of chestnut and walnut, and obsidian roots crisscrossed the islands. The conditions were ripe for a new experiment in living. Year-round villages and, soon after, the world's earliest pottery. The Paleolithic era in Japan thus ends not with a disappearance, but with a quiet turning point, as mobile bands began to anchor themselves to particular valleys and coves, setting in motion the long Jōmon epoch that would redefine what it meant to live on these mist-shrouded shores. When the last chill of the Ice Age loosened its grip, forests of oak, cedar, and chestnut swept over the islands. In this newly green world, about 14,000 years ago, Japan's inhabitants began one of the longest continuous cultural experiments on Earth. Archaeologists call it the Jōmon era, after the twisted rope impressions pressed into their clay pots. Shards of early Jōmon jars are older than any known field of wheat or barley. Deep pointed vessels, hand-coiled and fired beside open hearths, let hunter-gatherers simmer shellfish stews and leach bitter acorns. The pots' cord-marked surfaces kept them from slipping on wet ground, and may also have served as a maker's signature. Excavations at Sanai Maruyama in northern Honshu reveal a settlement that thrived for 15 centuries. Families lived in pit dwellings sunk half a metre into the soil, their roofs thatched with bark. Nearby towers of chestnut posts may have served as watch platforms or ritual markers, and raised granaries protected dried nuts and smoked venison. At the height of the Middle Jōmon, population across the islands likely approached 250,000, remarkable for people who still hunted, fished, and gathered. Jōmon craftsmen prized the razor-sharp edges of volcanic obsidian, trading it hundreds of kilometers along coastal canoe routes. They coated combs and bowls with glossy black lacquer tapped from poisoned sumac trees, the oldest lacquerware yet found anywhere. Polished stone axes, notched clay weights for fishing nets, and heddles for weaving plant fibers show a toolkit adapted to woodland life. More than 18,000 dog figurines survive. Small clay bodies with swelling hips, pinched waists, and wide, goggle eyes. Some hold hands to bellies or knees, suggesting prayers for safe birth or healing. Far to the north, villagers hauled river stones to build massive double rings, stone circles aligned with the summer solstice sunset, turning the forest floor into an open-air calendar. Chemical traces in Jōmon bones reveal a diet as diverse as the landscape: salmon, sea bream, wild boar, venison, nuts, bulbs, and seaweed. Shell mounds along the coasts pile up layer upon layer of oyster, clam, and scallop, each stratum a record of seasonal harvests. Charred chestnuts and walnuts appear so often that researchers believe people transplanted young trees near their homes, an early form of forest gardening. Warm, stable centuries allowed flamboyant, flame-style pottery and longhouse villages. Cooler spells, after 1500 BCE, shrank settlements and pushed some groups toward rich coastal fisheries. Burials vary, some include jade beads or lacquered pins, others none, but no tomb soars above the rest. Status seems to have rested on age, skill, or ritual role rather than rigid class. Modern genetic studies show that a thread of Jōmon ancestry lingers in today's Japanese, strongest among the Ainu of Hokkaido and the people of Okinawa. Elements of Jōmon spirituality, especially reverence for mountains, trees, and ancestor spirits, flow into later Shinto practice. Even the love of lacquered wood and cord-patterned designs traces back to these woodland artisans. By the late 4th millennium BCE, strange newcomers were sighted off the western shore, people bearing paddy rice, bronze tools, and woven silk. Their arrival would tip the balance from forest plenty to flooded fields, from cord-marked jars to shining metal bells. The quiet persistence of the Jōmon had set the stage. Now Japan stood on the brink of a new revolution. Some 3,000 years ago, as Europe discovered iron and China's Zhou kings built walled cities, the shores of western Kyushu witnessed an arrival that would overturn life across the Japanese archipelago. From the Korean peninsula came slender paddies of rice bound in straw sacks, small groups of migrants skilled in metallurgy, and new strains of millet and barley. Their pottery differed too. Smooth, wheel-finished jars with narrow rims instead of the lavish cord marks of the forest dwellers. This meeting of peoples marks the start of the Yayoi period, a name taken from a Tokyo neighborhood where the first shards were identified in the 1880s. Wetfield rice demanded teamwork unknown in Jōmon villages. Fields had to be flattened, diked, and flooded precisely. Seedlings were transplanted by hand and weeded in standing water, then sheaves harvested before autumn typhoons. In return, a single paddy could yield many times more calories than nuts or game. Archaeologists trace rice pollen eastward like a time-lapse map. Around 900 BCE, it reached northern Kyushu. By 600 BCE, the inland seacoast, and by 300 BCE, the Kanto Plain near today's Tokyo. Wherever paddies spread, population followed. Some estimates suggest the island's inhabitants multiplied tenfold within a millennium, from a few 100,000 to well over 2 million. The newcomers forged tools unknown to Jōmon craftspeople. Iron axes bit into hardwood, adzes shaved boards for boats and storehouses, and sickles sliced rice stalks cleanly at harvest. Yet the most spectacular metal objects were never meant for labour. Long bronze swords mirror bright discs with concentric patterns, and graceful dotaku bells cast in clay moulds. Many dotaku were buried upright on wooded hilltops, often in pairs, their thin walls engraved with deer hunts, rice plants, and swirling water. Scholars believe they rang during planting festivals to summon good harvests or proclaim a chief's status. Over 200 have been unearthed, none large enough to echo across a valley, but perfect for the clear musical chime of ritual. Rice taxed the landscape and provoked rivalry. Excavations at Yoshinogari in Saga Prefecture reveal moats 3 meters wide, ringing a settlement of watchtowers, plank houses, and communal granaries raised on stilts. Inside, craftsmen worked bronze and iron, while leaders held council in a central hall. Ishikawa in Kyushu shows similar earthworks. Further east, Circular ditches and palisades guarded smaller hamlets. Arrowheads lodged in skeletons and carbonized wooden shields tell of raids and skirmishes, perhaps over water rights, tribute, or trade routes to the continent. Yayoi graves sometimes contain bronze loom weights and bone needles, alongside beads of green jasper and glass. Hemp, rami, and even early silk threads have been identified under microscopes. Unlike the Jōmon wardrobe of bark cloth and furs, Yayoi clothing included sleeved tunics and narrow trousers secured with woven belts. The ability to spin and weave added a new measure of wealth. A farmer could now pay dues in bolts of cloth as well as in sheaves of unhusked rice. Domestic architecture shifted from sunken pit houses to raised floor dwellings with clay-tiled hearths. Elevated floors kept dampness and rats away from stored grain while smoke blackened the rafters. Preserving wood, diet broadened. People still took fish, deer and boar, but rice formed the staple. Skeletons show that average stature shortened slightly, and dental cavities increased, costs of a carbohydrate-rich menu. Childhood survival rates, however, improved with steadier food supplies. Modern DNA reveals that the Yayoi were not a single wave, but many. For centuries, boats crossed back and forth from the Korean peninsula carrying farmers, metalworkers, potters, and families in search of new land. They intermarried with Jōmon groups, especially along river basins where paddies spread slowly, creating mixed communities that blended forest knowledge with farming skill. This genetic mingling underlies today's Japanese population. A small but distinct Jōmon signal lingers most strongly among the Ainu in the far north and islanders of Okinawa in the south. Japan still lacked written records, but its reputation reached China. Han court historians in the 1st century CE spoke of 100 kingdoms of Awa scattered beyond the sea. 2 centuries later, the Wei Chronicles described a realm called Yamatai, ruled by Queen Himiko, a shaman queen who enthralled the people with magic and sorcery. She sent tribute of fine cloth and pearls to the Wei Emperor in 239 CE, and received a bronze mirror and a gold seal in return, tokens of recognition that bolstered her authority at home. The site of Yamatai remains hotly debated. Some archaeologists locate it in northern Kyushu, others in the Kenai Basin where later emperors rose. Wherever it lay, Himiko's diplomacy shows that by the 3rd century a powerful polity had emerged, led, at least for a time, by a woman whose charisma carried continental weight. Alongside mirrors and swords, traders brought bundles of bamboo slips inscribed with Chinese characters. Wooden tablets bearing inked symbols have turned up in late Yayoi layers, likely tally marks or clan names, the earliest hints that literacy had reached Japan's shores. Full record keeping would wait for the next age, but even a few strokes of ink signalled a mental revolution. Events could now be fixed in writing, not just memory. By the middle 3rd century, bronze ceremonial swords grow larger, moats deepen, and grave goods cluster in the hands of fewer families. Status had begun to crystallize. Regional chieftains vied for allies, forging marriage ties that linked Kyushu forts with settlements as distant as the Kanto Plain. The momentum pointed toward a unified authority capable of commanding labor on a colossal scale. Soon, elite burials would swell from coffin pits to earth mounds the length of football fields, capped by clay warriors and horses. Monuments we now call Kofun. Rice, metal, and migration thus redrew the map of ancient Japan. The Jōmon gift of long memory and woodland craft did not vanish. It merged with new skills to feed larger populations and imagine wider horizons. Fields rippled golden where once chestnuts fell, and the clang of iron adzes echoed through valleys. Out of these changes rose confederations, alliances, and, on the near horizon, the first kings of Yamato, who would stake their authority in earth and stone. The Yayoi transformation had unlocked the grain stores and stirred ambitions no boundary of forest or sea could long contain. Not long after Queen Himiko's death, a new symbol of power began to dominate Japan's lowland horizons. Colossal earthen mounds that rose like green ships from the rice valleys. These kofun, a word meaning simply old tombs, announced the dawn of a different political order, one able to command thousands of labourers, vast tracts of land, and the loyalty of distant clans. The earliest mounds, built in the late 3rd century, were modest circles or squares covering timber coffins. Within a century, builders perfected the keyhole shape, a round rear chamber joined to a rectangular approach, all ringed by 1, 2, or even 3 moats. From the air, the design resembles a padlock, fitting for monuments meant to guard a ruler's passage to the beyond. The largest, Daisenryo Kofun in Osaka, stretches 486 meters, longer than 5 football fields end to end, and encloses more earth than many Egyptian pyramids. Archaeologists estimate it took 15 years of continuous work by perhaps 20,000 people, each hauling wicker baskets of soil up earthen ramps. Along the sloping tiers of these mounds, craftsmen placed hollow clay cylinders that gradually evolved into lively Haniwa figures. Helmeted warriors, court ladies with high hair knots, saddled horses, farmhouses, and even musicians beating drums. The Haniwa stood shoulder to shoulder like a terracotta honor guard, marking sacred space and proclaiming the achievements of the buried chief. Their plain, unpainted surfaces offer a priceless catalogue of Kofun period armour, clothing, tools, and household design. The densest cluster of keyhole tombs lies in the fertile Kainai Basin around modern Nara and Osaka. Here rose the Yamato lineage, whose chiefs styled themselves Okimi, great kings. They forged alliances by marrying daughters into rival clans, bestowing honorific titles, and when persuasion failed, dispatching armed bands to enforce obedience. Each allied family, or uji, received a hereditary court rank called kabane, a marker of prestige that tied their identity to the Yamato throne. Seeking greater legitimacy, Yamato rulers looked across the sea. Chinese chronicles record that between 421 and 478 CE, 5 sovereigns of Wa sent tribute to the southern dynasties of China. The letters request official seals and military titles, claiming victories over Eastern barbarians and asking for recognition equal to Korean kings. Scholars match these envoys, King San, Qin, Sai, Ko and Bu, to rulers buried in mid-5th century keyhole tombs. The Chinese court's replies engraved on stone tablets became prestige objects displayed at home, proof that Yamato authority reached beyond the archipelago. Power depended on speed and steel. Sometime in the 4th century, war horses arrived from the Korean peninsula, alongside grooms, farriers, and new styles of sword. Haniwa now show mounted archers with stirrups and ring pommel sabres. Iron production expanded. Slag heaps in the mountains of Izumo and Kawachi mark bloomery furnaces where iron sand was smelted, hammered and traded downriver. Iron ploughs improved rice yields, while iron spearheads and cuirasses armed the retainers of every ambitious chief. Writing remained rare but precious. On the Inariyama sword found in Saitama and dated to 471 CE, smiths inlaid a 115-character inscription recording genealogy, battles, and the sword's forging. A rusted iron staff from Nara bears the phrase, "May the owner live long." one of the earliest wishes written in Chinese characters on Japanese soil. Even bronze mirrors, diplomatic gifts from China or local copies, sometimes carry dedicatory texts. Literacy was still an imported art, practiced by immigrant scribes from Baekje or Goguryeo, but it hinted at a new way to fix memory in metal and wood rather than oral tradition alone. Beneath these political shifts, everyday life kept its agricultural heartbeat. Villages clustered near river terraces, each with rows of raised granaries and thatched longhouses. Provincial elites dined on milled rice, pork, and ocean fish transported in salt barrels. Commoners relied more on millet, river carp, and field herbs. Burial goods reveal widening gaps. An aristocrat might rest with iron armour, Chinese glass beads, and gilded horse trappings, while a tenant farmer lay with a single earthen jar. Yet local shrines to mountain and harvest deities still bound the community together, and clan festivals blended older Jōmon reverence for nature with new displays of mounted warrior prowess. Although the throne was largely patriarchal, women did shape the age's myths and politics. Chronicles speak of Empress Jingu, who supposedly led an invasion of Korea while pregnant, and Princess Nakatsu Hime, a diplomatic bridge between rival clans. Haniwa portrayed court ladies wearing layered skirts and wide-brimmed hats, and a few richly furnished female tombs suggest that daughters of key families held land in their own right, wielding power through marriage alliances and religious roles. Relations with the three Korean kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, were complex. Yamato often sided with Baekje, exchanging iron, silk, and Buddhist relics for troops and teachers. Baekje artisans helped carve roof tiles, cast bronze statues, and perhaps design royal palaces. At the same time, coastal raids and counter-raids flared. Weapon caches in Kyushu contain arrowheads identical to those in southern Korea, evidence that war and commerce travelled the same sea routes. By the dawn of the 6th century, keyhole tombs grew fewer but grander, reserved for an inner circle of Yamato nobles. Titles became more formal, and a council of great Uji met at the royal court to settle disputes. Foreign scribes described the Yamato ruler not just as chieftain, but as Tenno, heavenly sovereign. Buddhism, carried in 538 by an embassy from Baekje, offered new ideology for kingship, a universal law, monumental temples, and literacy rooted in scripture. The old Kofun custom soon faded, replaced by stone grotto burials and wooden pagodas that pointed skyward rather than earthward. The Kofun age thus sealed its story in towering mounds of clay, Haniwa ranks, and the first strokes of written names. It welded a patchwork of rice-growing clans into the earliest version of a Japanese state, ready for continental faiths, legal codes, and the bureaucratic experiments of the Asuka court. Where a keyhole silhouette cast its shadow, viewers understood. A single lineage now claimed the land, the harvest, and the mandate of the heavens. In the spring of 538, a lacquered box arrived at the Yamato court from the Korean kingdom of Baekje. Inside stood a gilt bronze statue of the Buddha no taller than a child's forearm, a handful of scarlet-inked sutra scrolls, and a letter praising the precious doctrine that brings peace to rulers and subjects alike. Few gifts in Japanese history would prove more disruptive. The court's elder statesmen gathered in Asuka, a valley south of Nara where thatched palaces rose and fell with each new reign. The powerful Mononobe and Nakatomi clans warned that honouring a foreign god might anger the native kami. The equally influential Soga clan, eager for continental knowledge, urged acceptance. When plague swept the capital soon after, each side blamed the other, Mononobe warriors burned the Buddha images. Soga priests rebuilt them. The feud ended in 587 when Soga no Umako led troops against Mononobe. No Moriya at Shigisan. Arrows felled Moriya, and Buddhist banners flew over the battlefield. With the Mononobe broken, Soga daughters married into the royal line. One such daughter bore a boy named Umayado, later known as Prince Shotoku. When his aunt ascended the throne as Empress Suiko in 592, the young prince became regent and the visionary of his generation. Shotoku built Japan's first large monasteries, commissioned the towering pagoda and golden hall at Horyūji, and invited monks from Baekje and Goguryeo to teach medicine, astronomy and scripture. He also issued the 17-article constitution, a set of moral exhortations that urged officials to value harmony, obey imperial decrees, and revere the three treasures of Buddhism. Although the document was not a legal code in the modern sense, it introduced Confucian ideals of hierarchy and merit that would shape court etiquette for centuries. In 607, Shotoku dispatched a mission to the Sui emperor. His envoy carried a letter that opened with the phrase, "From the ruler of the land where the sun rises to the ruler of the land where the sun sets." The bold salutation astonished the Chinese court. No previous Japanese ruler had claimed parity with the Son of Heaven. Yet the mission returned with silk, calendars, musical scores, and the latest legal texts. Buddhist complexes quickly altered the skyline. Builders experimented with fired roof tiles that outlasted thatch, painted bracketed eaves vermilion and white, and anchored their pagodas with heart pillars sunk into stone bowls. Craftsmen learned to hammer bronze into statues with almond eyes and gentle smiles. In the workshops of Kuratsukuri no Tori, grandson of a Chinese immigrant, molten copper met tin and led to cast the serene Shaka triad at Horyūji, its halo flickering like flames in lamplight. The flow of artisans brought other skills. Paper, first imported sheet by sheet, began to be made locally from mulberry bark. Scribes copied sutras and compiled court diaries. Ink makers burned pine soot to produce a deep black that still clings to 8th century documents. Glazed medicine jars, saddle trees, glass beads, and looms capable of weaving patterned silk all testify to workshops humming behind temple walls. After Shotoku's death, the Soga grew overmighty. In 645, Prince Naka no Oe and Nakatomi no Kamatari burst into the Great Hall of Asuka Itabuki Palace and struck down Soga no Iruka during court audience. The coup ended Soga dominance and ushered in the Taika reforms. Great change. Proclamations declared all land the property of the sovereign. Provinces were reorganized, cadastral surveys planned, and an annual head tax levied in rice, cloth, and labor. A new capital was surveyed on Chinese grid principles, and a network of post stations mapped the imperial roads. Copper bells stamped with the era name Taika served as mile markers, while square timber gates called seki regulated travel between regions. Official ranks were now displayed on sleeve colours and cap feathers: violet for princes, blue for senior ministers, crimson for rising bureaucrats. Villagers found themselves recorded in household registers, names, ages, farmland allotments, all calculated for the next tax cycle. Change provoked resistance. In 672, the Jinshin War erupted when Emperor Tenji's sons fought over succession. Prince Owama gathered allies from the eastern provinces, many disaffected by new levies, and marched on the capital. After weeks of skirmishes, he prevailed, taking the throne as Emperor Tenmu. Determined to prevent future splits, Tenmu ordered the compilation of clan genealogies and the first nationwide chronicles. He also outlawed large keyhole tombs, severing the visible link to Kofun power and redirecting labor towards state projects. Tenmu favored Buddhism but did not discard the old faith. He installed his daughter as high priestess of Ise Shrine, guardian of the sun goddess. In court ceremonies, Shinto offerings preceded Buddhist chants, establishing a dual ritual system that would characterize Japanese religion henceforth. In rural hamlets, life blended new and old. Iron ploughs cut deeper furrows, yet many farmers still planted millet on upland slopes beside rice paddies. Tax demands pressed hard. A full quota meant 3 sheaves in 10 went to the granary, plus cloth or labour days, digging canals or hauling timber for temples. In return, roads improved, market towns sprouted at crossroads, and travelling sellers peddled salt, fish sauce, and Chinese medicines. Buddhist monks doubled as doctors, prescribing mugwort for fevers and acupuncture for stiff joints. They also introduced the Chinese lunar calendar. Villagers now timed festivals not only by plum blossoms but by dates inked on bamboo slips. Stone pestles found beside house foundations suggest families pounded rice into soft cakes for temple festivals. An ancestor of today's mochi, women of rank, like Empress Suiko and later Princess Nukata, famed poet and consort to Emperor Tenji, held visible influence, composing verse, sponsoring temples, and serving as diplomatic hostesses. At the same time, Confucian texts that ranked husbands over wives began to circulate, foreshadowing stricter gender hierarchies in later centuries. By the turn of the 8th century, tile-roofed temples dotted every province, each flying a golden finialed pagoda like a standard of the new order. Woodblock seals stamped documents with the chrysanthemum crest, and scribes debated the correct Chinese character for local river names. Yet court nobles still gathered at dawn to offer rice wine to mountain kami, and farmers still petitioned thunder gods when floods threatened their paddies. The Asuka era ended in 710 when a planned capital, Heijō-kyo, later Nara, opened with vermilion gates and a straight boulevard aimed toward the rising sun. Behind those gates lay ministries, archives, and an imperial avenue wide enough for tributary elephants, though none would ever arrive. The stone bases of palaces now welcomed tiled halls, and copper bowls rang with the chanting of monks from as far away as India. Asuka bequeathed Japan 3 enduring gifts: Buddhism as a pillar of state and conscience, Chinese-style institutions adapted to local needs, and the conviction that the islands stood in dialogue with a wider world. The next century would refine those gifts into codes of law, monumental temples, and a literature eager to tell its own story. But every stroke of the brush in that new age would trace back to voices carried across the sea and to the valley where an imported bronze Buddha first gleamed beneath the thatch. In the year 710, ox-drawn carts creaked through the Yamato plain, bearing cedar beams, roof tiles, and bundles of official registers. At the emperor's command, the entire court shifted from Asuka's scattered palaces to a brand new capital, laid out on a checkerboard of surveyed streets. Its builders named it Heijō-kyo, peaceful capital, but later generations would know it simply as Nara. For the first time in Japanese history, a city was meant to be permanent, not abandoned with each reign. Nara copied Chang'an, the Tang Dynasty metropolis, a 4.3-kilometre avenue shot north to the imperial palace, while smaller roads framed residential wards, armories, and bustling markets. District gates shut at dusk, street corners sprouted watchtowers. At sunrise, drums summoned ministers to the audience hall, where lacquered screens glowed red in the early light. Outside the palace walls, merchants from Kyushu sold horses and sulphur. Peddlers hawked dried persimmons, and foreign envoys lodged in the Jōmon guest compound. 2 legal compilations, Taiho in 701 and Yoro in 718, supplied the city's moral backbone. Together they formed the Ritsuryō system. Ritsu for criminal statutes, Ryo for administrative rules. Every free adult male owed fixed taxes. 3% of his rice harvest, bolts of hemp cloth, and 10 days of corvée labour. In return, he received a paddock-shaped plot called kubunden, theoretically reassigned every 6 years. Women held smaller parcels and paid lighter dues. Land, in principle, belonged to the throne. Governors merely managed it. Bureaucrats ranked themselves by sleeve colours: purple for grand councillors, crimson for middle ministers, green down the scale to clerks. Examinations in Confucian classics existed on paper, but appointments still hinged on family lineage. Powerful clans, the Fujiwara, Tachibana, and others, steered ministries from behind silk screens. For farmers on distant deltas, the Ritsuryō ideal felt remote. After planting, they hoisted sheaves onto ox carts for state granaries. In winter, they cut timber for public storehouses or dug irrigation channels under an overseer's bamboo whip. Yet the new roads brought benefits. Travelling monks dispensed herbal remedies, peddlers offered iron fish hooks and tang pottery, and official Ekiden relay posts let a village messenger gallop to Nara with news of floods before seedlings rotted. Catastrophe struck in 735 when smallpox swept ashore at Kyushu's trade ports. Within 2 years, the virus carried off perhaps a quarter of Japan's people, including many taxpayers who fed the Ritsuryō machine. Emperor Shomu read the disaster as both warning and call to action. He proclaimed himself servant of the three treasures and ordered a vast network of provincial temples, kokubunji, and nunneries, kokubuniji. Each was to house a bronze statue of the medicine Buddha and copy sutras for the realm's protection. Shomu's masterstroke was the great Buddha of Todai-ji. Artisans mined copper in Mutsu, smelted it in Sagami, and carted ingots to Nara. The casting furnace, 20 meters in diameter, glowed for days. Workers shoveled charcoal in shifts, and monks chanted to steady nerves. When completed in 752, the seated Vairocana Buddha stood 15 meters high, its fingers alone the length of a man's arm. The dedication ceremony drew envoys from India and Persia, proof that Nara, though insular by policy, sat on a branch of the Silk Road. Behind Todai-ji, a Cyprus storehouse called the Shoso Inn preserved gifts and requisites from the ceremony: Iranian glass, lapis blue brocade stitched with elephants, a lute inlaid with mother-of-pearl camels, and carbon-inked bills for rice and timber. These objects, sealed in Japan's driest attic, reveal that 8th century courtiers admired fashions born far beyond their seas. Literacy bloomed under Buddhist and bureaucratic needs. Court scholars assembled creation myths and clan records into the Kojiki, 712, and the Nihon Shoki, 720. Then compiled the Fudoki, gazetteers rich with local lore, talking cranes, boiling springs, and rice gods in disguise. Poetry, too, found an archive. Around 759, editors stitched 4,516 verses into the Manyoshu, collection of 10,000 leaves. Its pages carry voices of emperors, soldiers on frost-bitten frontiers, and a blind woman begging through Nara's side streets. The anthology used Chinese characters phonetically, a script later streamlined into kana. Nara's palace ranks limited female visibility, yet women of the Fujiwara and Tachibana clans wielded influence as consorts, abbesses, or even sovereigns. Empress Koken ruled twice, the second time under the name Shotoku, relying on the charismatic monk Dokyo. When Dokyo attempted to ascend the throne by divine oracle, alarmed nobles exiled him and resolved that no monk and few women should reign again. Still, court ladies penned sutra dedications, sponsored hospitals, and hosted poetry salons scented with orchid incense. Despite reforms, the Ritsuryō model strained. Epidemic losses shrank the tax base. Governors in need of revenue granted tax exemptions to temples and noble estates. These Shun lands escaped the cadastral survey and grew year by year. Tenant farmers happy to trade state dues for lighter private rents deserted official plots. By 780, more grain reached elite storehouses than imperial granaries, and the central army, never large, was quietly replaced by provincial militias loyal to estate managers. Monasteries too amassed power. Enryakuji on Mount Hiei formed bands of Sohei warrior monks who marched to the capital when court decrees threatened temple privileges. Officials hesitated to confront men who carried halberds in one hand and prayer beads in the other. As Nara's temples loomed taller than palace halls, Emperor Kanmu judged the city's sacred obligations too dense for political maneuver. He also feared floods from the nearby Kizu River, court factions hardened by decades in one place, and open sewers that fouled summer air. In 784, he shifted the seat briefly to Nagaoka, then in 794 to Heian-kyo, the future Kyoto, seeking spiritual renewal and a fresh grid. The move closed the Nara period, but left its institutions intact: legal codes, temple networks, and an image of imperial majesty framed by pagoda roofs. Nara taught Japan to imagine itself as a governed whole, land measured, people counted, taxes scheduled, sins redeemed by gilded bronze. Yet it also showed how ideals bend under plague, privilege, and human ambition. In the new capital, poets and courtiers would polish elegance to a fine sheen, even as private estates and provincial warriors gained momentum. The Heian Age promised both shimmering refinement and fresh tensions, threads spun directly from the loom of Nara's great design. In the autumn of 794, Emperor Kanmu rode northwest from Nara, crossed the Katsura River, and halted on a broad basin fringed by low mountains. Surveyors had already staked a perfect grid upon the plain. Carpenters lashed cedar scaffolds for the imperial palace. Work gangs dug canals to tame the Kamo's seasonal floods. Here Kanmu proclaimed Heian-kyo, capital of peace and tranquility. Unlike Nara, whose Buddhist towers crowded the throne, Heian was meant to be a fresh canvas, a city of measured avenues, free-flowing water, and a sky uncluttered by rival pagodas. Heian's plan echoed Tang China's Chang'an. The Suzaku Avenue, 75 meters wide, ran exactly south-north for 4 kilometers, terminating at Vermilion Palace gates. Inside lay audience halls, treasury offices, and gardens laid out on yin-yang principles. Yet builders listened as much to Shinto diviners as to Chinese manuals. The palace stood at the northern edge of the grid, so that protective mountains, called the Blue Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Tortoise, flank the cardinal points. Willow trees lined canals to entice harmful spirits into moving water. Shrine groves remained where surveyors found ancient sacred oaks. The new monarch intended more than urban beauty. He trimmed the bloated priesthood of Nara, reducing temple stipends and forbidding monks to petition officials directly. To secure fresh tax land, he renewed campaigns against the emishi of Tohoku. In 801, his chosen general, Sakanue no Tamuramaro, rode north bearing the grand title Sei-i Taishogun. After winter battles on frozen rice fields, Tamuramaro established garrisons at fortified towns, Isawa, Shiwa, and later Morioka, pushing the imperial frontier to the Kitakami River. Emishi horse archers were offered rank and rice fields in return for service. Many joined border units, blending steppe tactics with Yamato command. Kanmu also reorganized provincial defense. The old peasant levy proved too slow for distant rebellions, so he authorized regional commanders to recruit Condé, paid mounted guards drawn from minor nobles. The imperial court still claimed a monopoly on violence, but responsibility for security was drifting outward toward men who lived by the bow. Even as Kanmu curtailed Nara's great monasteries, he sponsored 2 charismatic monks, whose teachings would reshape Japanese spirituality. Saicho scaled Mount Hiei in 788 and founded Enryakuji, headquarters of the Tendai school. Tendai taught that all beings possessed Buddha nature and could achieve enlightenment through devotion to the Lotus Sutra. Saicho's monks combined meditation, esoteric rites, and rigorous study, emerging after 12 years of training as scholar priests and, in practice, able bureaucrats. Kukai journeyed to Chang'an in 804, mastered tantric rituals, and returned with Sanskrit texts, mandala scrolls, and ingenious syllabary charts. On Mount Koya, he built Kongobuji, cradle of Shingon Buddhism. Shingon's fire ceremonies, mantra chants, and cosmic Buddha imagery dazzled court audiences. Its promise of enlightenment in this very body appealed to aristocrats wary of distant afterlives. Both sects won imperial patronage, yet their mountain precincts, guarded by steep paths and armed acolytes, soon became semi-autonomous strongholds, spiritual and temporal power intertwined. While emperors still ruled directly, one family mastered the quieter arts of influence. Fujiwara, no Fuyutsugu, rose through Kanmu's bureaucracy, drafting palace regulations and smooth alliances. His nephew Yoshifusa later refined the tactic of marrying Fujiwara daughters to reigning princes. By the mid-9th century, 2 of every 3 emperors were born to a Fujiwara mother, a demographic detail that would soon translate into regency. For now, the clan contented itself with senior minister posts, access to provincial appointments, and graceful villa compounds along the Kamo River. Heian court life revolved around Shindenzukuri mansions. Main halls faced south over ornamental ponds. Covered corridors linked side wings where women composed poems behind blinds. Aristocrats marked seasons with colour, their layered robes shifting from plum in first spring to russet in late autumn. Literary circles prized elegant Chinese prose, but a gentler current was rising. Court secretaries simplified complex characters into phonetic sketches, kana, to jot personal notes, and waka poetry. The earliest kana diaries date from late 9th century, yet their roots lay in this formative age when scribes experimented with brushes poised between 2 scripts and 2 cultures. Artisans adapted Tang models to local taste. Gilt bronze Buddhas acquired softer smiles. Palace walls displayed folding screens of cypress and mist. Luthiers shaped the biwa lute with a broader belly for richer resonance. Workshops in Setsu and Sanaj produced celadon glazed stoneware, while dyers perfected indigo gradients for informal court robes. Even perfumers contributed, mixing clove, aloes wood, and cinnamon into sachets tucked beneath brocade sleeves, creating scent codes by which nobles identified one another in dimly lit corridors. South of the capital's moat, farmers still bent over rice shoots transplanted by hand. The Ritsuryō tax quotas remained, yet many cultivators registered under private shun to escape state levies. In exchange for lighter dues and protection, they surrendered a portion of harvest to estate managers, often temples or Fujiwara kin. As shun multiplied, government storehouses stood half empty. Wheel tracks of estate rice wagons bypassed tax checkpoints at dawn. Local gentry, appointed as gunji district stewards, supervised tenants, settled quarrels, and led mounted patrols against bandits. Their sons learnt both calligraphy and sword, straddling court culture and frontier necessity. In them lay the embryo of the Bushi class, though no one yet used that word in official documents. Early Heian government faced fresh strains. In 823, imperial founder Kanmu's grandson abdicated, giving courtiers a precedent for early retirement. Pensions for ex-emperors and construction costs for their villas burdened the treasury. Severe frosts in 869 and flooding 2 years later triggered petitions for tax relief. Responses arrived slowly, fueling peasant flight and sporadic uprisings. One revolt in the Tohoku, led by former Emishi families angry over grain shortages, required a large expeditionary force and heavy loans of rice from temple granaries. In the capital, courtier rivalry turned ugly with the Ottoman incident of 866 when the main palace gate burned. Rumour blamed the ambitious minister Tomonori, but evidence proved thin. The investigation nonetheless ruined several careers and revealed that even within brocade walls, power could hinge on accusation and gossip. By the century's close, Heian-kyo glittered at dawn with tiled roofs and gold finials, its avenues echoing with crows and ox-cart bells. Yet the polished facade concealed realities Kanmu never intended. Private estates siphoned taxes, mountain monasteries fielded armed retainers, aristocratic factions rehearsed intrigue. Culture blossomed, calligraphy brushed on indigo paper, music echoing in moonlit pavilions, while beyond the city, new horse warriors learned to fight under estate banners. The next phase would see the Fujiwara convert marriage strategy into open regency. Provincial strongmen convert patrols into hereditary militias, and poets record the court's joys and forebodings in a fluid kana script. The Heian experiment was drifting from imperial centralism toward aristocratic splendour, beautiful, intoxicating, and quietly unstable. When the 10th century turned, the imperial throne still shone at the centre of Heian-kyo, but the hand that steered it belonged to one house alone. Generation after generation, the Fujiwara clan guided children of their blood, grandsons and nephews, to sit upon the chrysanthemum throne, while mature emperors ceded daily rule to regents drawn from their mother's family. In public, the court performed ancient rites. Behind the screens, Fujiwara scribes signed decrees, assigned governorships, and counted rents from vast private estates that now dwarfed the revenues of the state itself. No Fujiwara embodied this quiet dominance better than Fujiwara no Michinaga, 966–1027. Wealthy, urbane, and politically fearless, Michinaga married 4 daughters to reigning or future emperors, and briefly saw 3 of his grandsons on the throne at once, an achievement chroniclers hailed as brilliant as the full moon. From a lakeside villa at Byodo Inn, he hosted moon viewing banquets, floating bronze lamps on the pond and reciting waka poems beside incense braziers. When monks chanted sutras at the Phoenix Hall he later donated, the Buddha Amida seemed to glide over the water itself, a vision of paradise mirrored on earth. Court diaries from his era describe layered silk robes dyed in shifting colours, plum over haze green, amber over indigo, chosen to match a single morning's light. Noblemen competed in composing 21-syllable poems on the scent of the first rain, while Michinaga's palace artisans copied Chinese hand scrolls in silver ink on indigo paper. The splendour, however, masked a fiscal truth. Nearly half of the rice paddies feeding this elegance lay beyond the tax rolls of the Ritsuryō state. These exempt lands, called shuen, grew from small grants to temples or princely households, but soon expanded through a legal tool known as commendation. Provincial landholders, worried by drought, bandits, or mounting taxes, could commend their plots to a powerful patron in the capital. In return for annual gifts of rice or silk, the patron secured court seals that made the land immune to state levy and inspection. Local cultivators stayed in place, but a slice of every harvest now travelled by river barge to the Fujiwara storehouses lining the Kamo River. As Shun multiplied, the government's grain granaries stood emptier each year. Imperial ministers tried to audit holdings, but estate stewards flashed bamboo passes bearing the names of Fujiwara or leading temples, documents few inspectors dared challenge. By the mid-11th century, tax-free estates covered perhaps 2/3 of all cultivated land. Shun needed muscle as well as paper charms. Cargo barges risked pirate ambush at river mouths. Deer herds trampled dikes. Neighbouring clans disputed boundary markers. Estate managers therefore hired mounted guards drawn from lesser court families and tough provincial lineages. These men, eventually called samurai, those who serve, excelled in mounted archery, night scouting, and sudden raids. Family honour hinged on readiness to fight at a steward's signal. Children of these warrior families learned to write, but ink shared space with bow practice and sword drill. They followed a harsh code of frank speech, Spartan diet, and self-policing that contrasted with the perfumed ceremonies of the capital. Many still traced distant ties to Heian nobles, but their fortunes now depended on horses and bowstrings, not poetry contests. Two uprisings showed both the limits of Fujiwara reach and the potency of the new warrior class. Taira no Masakado's revolt, 939 to 940. Born to a branch of a courtly house managing estates in the Kanto Plain, Masakado quarrelled with cousins over inheritance. Skirmishes spiralled until he attacked provincial offices, proclaimed himself new emperor of an eastern realm, and briefly collected taxes in his own name. Central alarm was swift. Rewards were posted, and allied warrior bands, not an imperial army, hunted Masakado down. His severed head was shipped to Heian-kyo and mounted near the market gate, as both warning and marvel. A provincial horseman had dared mimic the throne. Fujiwara no Sumitomo's piracy, 939 to 941. Almost simultaneously in the inland sea, Sumitomo, a disgruntled governor's son, seized ports, burned tax outposts, and ran a pirate fleet that threatened rice shipments to the capital. Again, the court commissioned regional warriors, this time led by Minamoto commanders, to suppress him. Sumitomo was defeated after fierce island battles, but the episode revealed that sea lanes, not palace ordinances, decided the capital's food supply. Both revolts ended in victory for the court, yet victory lay in outsourcing violence to clans whose prestige rose with every campaign. The Minamoto, rewarded with new shun and honorary titles, gained a foothold across eastern provinces. The Taira, though tarnished by Masakado's kin, regrouped in western domains and honed maritime skill. While frontier skirmishes flared, the Middle Heian aristocracy reached its artistic apex. The kana syllabary matured into a literary instrument of nuance and emotion. Around 1000, Murasaki Shikibu composed the tale of Genji, tracing the loves and losses of a luminous prince across 54 chapters. Her rival, Sei Shonagon, penned the Pillow Book, a sharp-eyed notebook of court gossip and seasonal beauty. Both writers served Fujiwara consorts and captured the atmosphere of salons lit by oil lamps and perfumed by aloes wood. Yet the very refinement that dazzled readers reinforced social distance. As nobles spent evenings arranging incense games and moon parties, estate stewards calculated rents and riders sharpened arrows. Two worlds, linked by tax grain and distant kinship, were drifting apart. Late in the 11th century, a run of cold summers cut rice yields. Provincial governors reported empty paddies and rising banditry. Courtiers, shielded by estate revenues, largely dismissed warnings. But in 1068, a prince outside Fujiwara lineage ascended as Emperor Go-Sanjo. Determined to restore imperial finances, he ordered an aggressive register of Shuun titles. Fujiwara ministers protested, stewards stalled. Survey teams met armed resistance. Though Go-Sanjo reigned only 7 years, his challenge signaled that the Fujiwara grasp on policy was no longer unshakable. Shortly after, retired Emperor Shirakawa perfected the art of cloistered rule, insei, by abdicating yet continuing to govern from a monastic residence. He bypassed Fujiwara regents and tapped directly into provincial revenues assigned to imperial temples. The High Court's balance of power began to tilt. By 1100, Heian-kyo still glittered with brocade screens and garden lanterns, but beneath the elegance stood new realities. Estate networks, not bureaucratic fields, fed the realm. Warrior clans, rewarded for policing hinterlands, had tested their strength against rebels and pirates. Retired emperors experimented with offstage rule, eroding Fujiwara monopoly. The Fujiwara remained rich and urbane, but their hegemony now shared the stage with men who rode under different standards and answered to calloused provincial hands. The next generation would bring fresh religious passion, literary brilliance, and civil wars sparked by courtly succession disputes. Fires that would invite those mounted clans through the palace gates. The quiet drift from aristocratic pageant to warrior politics had begun, and the echo of hooves could already be heard beyond the capital's northern hills. By the middle of the 11th century, silver-grey roof tiles shimmered along every avenue of Heian-kyo, and aristocrats still quoted moonlit verses as though nothing in the world could change. Yet beneath the poetry, a mood of strain crept through both cloisters and country lanes, fertilizing two very different growths. A blaze of cultural brilliance at court, and a surge of restless religious passion far beyond it. Monks trained in Chinese calendrics calculated that the year 1052 marked the first year of Mappo, the latter days of the law, when the Buddha's teachings would enter irreversible decline. Temples displayed painted scrolls of hell realms to remind worshippers what awaited souls unshielded by new forms of devotion. Even courtiers who still prized elegance now kept prayer beads hidden in brocade sleeves, whispering sacred names between poetry contests. Amid fears of cosmic degeneration, salvation by personal effort felt impossible, and a simple practice gained ground, chanting the name of Amida Buddha. In 1275, the monk Honen founded the Jodo, Pure Land school, teaching that heartfelt repetition of the Nembutsu alone could secure rebirth in Amida's western paradise. Honen preached outside palace gates, attracting farmers, servants, and disillusioned nobles alike. Conventional monks accused him of undermining discipline, but Pure Land gatherings multiplied across provinces, where bronze bells now rang with a single refrain: Namu Amida Butsu. Anxiety did not dampen militancy. Mount Hiei's Tendai monks, clad in white leggings and birch bark helmets, marched down to the capital in 1081, bearing the shrine palanquin of their tutelary kami. They forced the emperor to rescind a land decree, then returned by torchlight, chanting sutras in triumph. Rival Shingon monasteries on Mount Koya hired their own Sohei defenders. Skirmishes between temple armies scorched rice fields north of the city, and petition fires occasionally reddened the night sky over the Suzaku Gate. Inside the palace quarter, retired Emperor Shirakawa and his successors ruled from shaded compounds, exercising power through private secretariats, while official emperors performed rituals. The cloistered rulers patronized artisans with near-reckless generosity. Byodo-in's Phoenix Hall, completed 1053, mirrored Amida's paradise, its twin wings sweeping over a lotus pond. Inside, sculptor Joko carved a seated Amida from joined blocks of cypress, lacquered and gilded until it seemed to float on reflected water. Artists of the Yamato-e school unfurled horizontal scrolls that narrated court gossip, earthquakes, and temple fires in episodic pictures. The Bandainagon Ekotoba captured the 866 Palace Gate arson with tilted roofs and swirling clouds of ink smoke. The eye is drawn across 3 meters of paper in a single breathless chase. Calligraphers experimented with flowing kana scripts, pale ink on indigo paper flecked with gold dust, perfected by Fujiwara no Sadanobu, in specimens later prized as flying white style. Court ladies maintained literary dominance. Lady Murasaki had set the standard with Genji decades earlier. Now smaller diaries, the Sarashina memoir, mother of Michitsuna's Kagero diary, explored longing and Buddhist resignation. Male courtiers answered with more muscular records. Fujiwara no Munetada's Chuyuki chronicles, famines, plagues, and costly repairs to crumbling city walls, painting a capital less stable than scroll paintings suggest. A cultured noble of 1,150 might spend the morning judging incense blends, kodo, the afternoon practicing gagaku flute beside a garden waterfall, and the evening composing waka on the beauty of a drooping wisteria. A vocabulary of colour and scent codes let lovers converse without words. A touch of plum perfume on letter paper signalled, "Waiting under moonlight," while a robe lining dyed ivory grey hinted at mourning or unspoken desire. Even so, the ideal of mono no aware, a gentle sorrow for life's ephemerality, tempered pleasure with preemptive nostalgia. Far from the capital, village shrines adopted new rites. Carved itinerant bodhisattva statues travelled from hamlet to hamlet, each stop recorded on its hollowed back. Farmers pooled rice to stage dengaku harvest dances, where acrobats balanced atop stilts to rhythmic drum and flute. Performances believed to please both kami and Amida. Tale-tellers recited miracles, a horse groom saved from hell by a single whispered nenbutsu, a fisherman whose broken net mended itself after he donated rice to a roadside Jizo statue. In 1156, the Hogan Rebellion pitted rival retired emperors against each other. 3 years later, the Heiji Rebellion saw the military house of Taira no Kiyomori burn the ex-emperor's palace and seize the infant throne. For the first time, a provincial warrior commanded the capital's guards and tax ports. Kiyomori invested estate profits into maritime trade with Song dynasty China, importing copper coins and silk that outshone Fujiwara brocades. Courtiers smiled at his wealth, yet wrote anxious poems about sleeves wet with unseen tears. As the century waned, a new genre stirred. Gunki Monogatari, the war tale. Court scribes began collecting oral accounts of battles, listing arrow trajectories and heroic deaths with the same elegance once reserved for moonlit love. Draft passages describing Masakado and Sumitomo circulated among scribes. Monks at temples compiled chronicles of temple army exploits. The stage was set for the Heike Monogatari, though its full form awaited the coming storm. By 1180, drought browned the Kanto paddies. The cost of rice in Heiankyo tripled. Petitions clogged the Ministry of Popular Affairs. Kiyomori forced the court to relocate briefly to Fukuhara near today's Kobe to secure his trade fleets, but seasick courtiers soon fled back to the old capital, leaving warriors to mutter that aristocrats had grown too delicate for power. Bands of hungry farmers in the Kenai Basin ignored rent demands, taking shelter under Pure Land banners to claim religious asylum. Temple markets bustled while government granaries sat thin. Late-Heian Japan thus shimmered with paradox. A court that perfected beauty while losing purchase on the provinces. Temples that promised salvation, even as their retainers clashed swords. Common folk who found both solace and boldness in a single sacred name. The Phoenix Hall mirrored paradise on water, yet wildfire flickered on distant hills. Poems floated on indigo paper, even as arrow shafts were waxed in estate armories. The next clash for the soul and soil of the archipelago would not be settled by incense games or sutra debates. Mounted Minamoto archers, long nursing grudges on the eastern marches, were already tightening saddle girths. When they rode, the war tales taking shape in monastic scriptoria would leap from parchment into living fire, carrying courtly ideals, Pure Land prayers, and warrior oaths into a single echoing narrative of fate. At dawn on the 24th day of the third lunar month in 1185, seawater rolled like hammered bronze through the narrow straits of Dan no Ura. On one side floated the scarlet banners of the Taira, on the other the white pennants of the Minamoto. When the tide turned, arrows darkened the air. Child Emperor and Toku vanished beneath the waves with the imperial regalia, and a lineage of courtly power went under with him. By dusk, the cries of seabirds echoed over drifting helmets and broken oars. Months later, Minamoto no Yoritomo, once a provincial exile, rode south to Kamakura, where pine-crested ridges hemmed a narrow coastal plain. There he built low barracks rather than golden halls, and received the title Sei Taishogun, from a throne now weary, almost relieved, to yield the burden of rule. The rhythm of government shifted with the surf. Decisions travelled on horseback, not in silken sleeves, and the warrior's inkstone lay beside the quiver. Yet the mountains around Heian-kyo still glowed crimson in autumn. Monks on Mount Hiei still tolled their bronze bells at dusk, and villagers still bent over rice shoots when the first frogs sang in spring. Japan had stepped across an invisible line. Emperors would reign, shoguns would rule, and the tales of Genji would share shelf space with the epic of the Heike. Ancient patterns lingered in pottery shards, shrine groves and whispered prayers, but a new cadence, measured in hoofbeats and drawn bows, now led the dance. In the hush after the last arrow fell, the medieval age began.